So I think I've got a quick break in the rain. Not sure how long I've got, but a little bit of sunlight and no rain on my back here in front of the vise. So what we're going to do is bearings. This goes into this bearing. This bearing is the intermediate clutch or operating clutch bearing. That's going to then go into that. So I'm going to put it into this first, then put it into that. After that, I'm going to do a similar thing with this bearing. Press that into there, and then I'm going to press this into here, into the clutch, and then I'm going to press the PTO bearing in. So one thing to note, these had been previously painted and looked fantastic. What I had noticed in the time that between them being painted and me getting them is that they'd rusted on the inside of these races. There was surface rust in all of them, so I just went to town with a little bit of Scotch-Brite and cleaned that all up, cleaned the other side up, chucked a little bit of grease on that, so that probably saves me a little bit of time when I'm putting these bearings in because they're already greased. So I might start off with this guy here. There's numerous thoughts on this, whether we put this into the sprocket first and then this into the two of those, or this into this first and then into that. Doesn't matter which way you want to go. I'm going to go this way. No real reason. What I'm going to start by doing is tapping that in with a rubber mallet, just gently. Okay, because this has to go in further than the edge of the bearing there, it's not going to press into the vise real easily unless I've got something like this, but I figure since it was going in so nicely, I would, with the rubber mallet, I thought I might just quickly hit it in the rest of the way with two little supports of timber. Either side. So and that is as easy as that. That popped in quite nicely. Two parts. Vise up a little bit more. Bit of timber on that side. Timber on this side. A little bit more centered to the vise. That's pretty good right there. And then it's just a matter of popping in your bearing, making sure that you're going in nice and straight at every point. You'll hear those pops. Okay, it's pretty tight. bearing is sitting very nicely there, and seems to be homed all the way back in here. So that's that. Next is this clutch sprocket, and I've just got a little press on the other side to go exactly the same size as the bearing. Hopefully a tiny bit smaller actually. Some of the ones that needs to go in further, deeper. Got a piece of timber. Okay, lining this up is pretty imperative. Lining up correctly. Okay, let's do it up. Those pops are horrible. Try to avoid dropping this stuff. That is in there now, and it's also a little bit recessed in underneath the full edge here, so you can see it's a little bit recessed. And the other side again, spewed a little bit of grease out. Looks good. Got PTO bearing next. Hit this one in with this is a self-aligning bearing, this guy here, so I might give him a little tap in with the rubber mallet because it's not going in straight. Okay, rubber mallet actually works really well, apart from the fact that we want that in a little bit deeper than that. Yeah, it went really well. Alright, so let's get this little guy back in the equation, and get this guy. And now we'll give it a go in the vise. Okay. So again, PTO bearing sits in underneath the height of that and goes all the way to the back. So we're putting this piece to this piece. I just got a nice bonus, found some more tape that I didn't even realise was on there. A lot of this stuff was pre-painted for me. I repainted a lot of it, but this chain gear I left as is, so that's a nice surprise. Okay, so we're going to be putting this to this, and we need a piece of timber, we need a socket, because that's going to be fitting there. The roll pin's actually in there. You may well see that roll pin. There it is. Yep, that roll pin. He lines up with that cutout. That cutout there. So you can rough fit that. Line it up. Errant grease. Okay, so that's ready to go. I just need to put my socket over the end there. My piece of timber. Okay. And another piece of timber. There. Make sure your alignment's all very nice. Okay, there's no rush here, just take your time. Get the alignment perfect. Take a couple of shots, and then we'll get through that. Alright. I'm just going to do that up. Okay, so for the clutch bearing, which goes in a little bit below the top of the shaft there, I'm just going to tap that in and give a little love tap to start that. I have already molly greased it. Okay, so what I've got here is basically that little setup there, socket. Push that in because it's got to go in deeper. And push it in. Boy, that one went in easier than I thought it was going to. And we have it, as you can see, below the edge there, recessed in. It's exactly how it should be. Can't see anything from that side. And that's the clutch bearing. Okay, so a couple of things. PTO bearing, I took that back out because I hadn't greased it, which I have done now in a previous video, so I'm going to stick that back in. And unfortunately I had a little bit of an issue with my rear roller bearing holders. I bought this mower off somebody else, and unfortunately one of them aren't actually original Scott Bonnar 45. It's for a Super Swift, so it's 1.5 mil bigger in radius, which means that the bearing was just sitting in there, couldn't press it in there with anything sort of tight or anything. So anyway, long story short, rather than mucking around with those and putting the little spring or little spacer bit that you put inside there, we don't need him, because I have bought some of these beautiful billeted pressed aluminium ones from, so I've repainted those. They only came in a couple of days ago. Repainted those. They don't require that little part in them that the older style do, so I'm going to be putting the bearings into those as well. And then I'm going to do the corks, that cork and the cork that fits inside this part of the clutch. Okay, so I'm going to put those aside, and I'm going to start with the PTO. And oftentimes with the bearings you'll find there's a slightly chamfered side and there's a flatter side. The chamfered side is what you try and aim to get that into the housing first. Not a massive stress if you don't, but just sometimes makes it go in a little bit easier. Use a little bit more grease. Heaps. Put a little bit more in. Always nice and messy when you're playing with grease. Nice new grease is not so bad. When it's old grease, if I want to pull down or something like that, then it tends to be a bit yuckier. But anyway, that's a little bit of grease in there, not a great deal of grease, just enough to help assist putting it in and possibly getting it out again if necessary, like I had to grease the bearing. Okay, so I reckon that's the chamfered side. Put that in there. I'm not going to press these, I'm going to just use my rubber mallet and this little table I've made up here. It's got carpet on it, so hopefully it protects paintwork. That went in nice and easy. Okay, so got my little bearing pusher, a little bit smaller than the bearing. And that lets me get it down to where that needs to be on that PTO bearing holder. Okay. Because we're going to be using all new shafts, new engine, new clutch, new everything. Hopefully the self-aligning bearing purposes won't be needed because everything will be nice and straight. So next we're going to put in our rear roller bearing bearings. I bought some nice new Japanese bearings, so very exciting. Put those in. Might as well do both of them while my fingers are a bit dirty and greasy. Save me cleaning them up twice. Okay, nice. That aside. clean up. Lovely new bearing. Okay. Just going to use rubber mallet on my little table. So that's really nice and tight. Rubber mallet's not going to do it, but it has got it started. So I'm going to do that with the other one, and we're going to go over to the vise. Okie dokie at the vise. So basically just got bearing, something to push it with, and into your vise. Great, right there. Ooh. So that all goes in super easy. You drop it. This is why you put etch primer on. I neglected to put some etch primer on this piece, which is the only piece of the whole mower. It hasn't got etch primer on it, but I'll be sanding that back a little bit and fixing that up, because that little drop then is all it took to take that off on those edges. Needless to say, we'll continue to push this in. Get the smaller bearing pusher and pop that in the vise. Push that home nicely. Sitting just below top of the, and it's perfect inside of there. Perfect. So we'll do the other one and then we'll fix up that paintwork. Let's use a small one for this time, straight off the bat. What's happening here is that's not level. It's going in, not straight. So I'm going to hit it with the rubber mallet and straighten it up a little bit. Okay, now we're a lot straighter. I'm going to go back to the vise. Two hands is just sometimes never enough. Okay, this is the one. better. In there. And we're there. Push that home. That little pop. I love that pop. And okay, so on George's rear roller holder bearings, the one with the non-adjustable one with the 3 normal holes, it sits relatively flush with your bearing holder, and the adjustable one, the one with these cutouts, that sits a little bit below the surface, just marginally, but just a little bit below the surface. So if you do get George's rear roller bearing holders, take note of that. One sits pretty even, one sits a little bit below. That's the bearing pressing of those guys. See you soon.